A nation in shock. On a quiet summer evening in 2007, an 11-year-old boy walked home from football practice, completely unaware that his life was about to be stolen in an instant. A single bullet, fired by a teenage gang member, ended his life before it had even truly begun. His name was Rhys Jones, and his murder sent shockwaves through the UK. This wasn't just another crime story. This was a national tragedy, an innocent child gunned down in broad daylight, caught in the crossfire of a senseless gang feud. His death exposed the dark underbelly of Britain's rising youth gang culture, where teenagers armed themselves with deadly weapons and settled petty disputes with violence. Liverpool was no stranger to gang-related crime, but this was different. Rhys wasn't part of a gang. He wasn't involved in any feud. He was just a schoolboy who loved football. And yet, in a split second, his life was ended by someone who never even knew his name. The murder of Rhys Jones wasn't just tragic, it was a wake-up call. It forced the country to confront the chilling reality of teenage gun violence. How did things spiral this far out of control? Who was responsible? And would justice ever be served? What happened on August 22, 2007, would haunt Liverpool forever. But the story of Rhys Jones didn't end with his death. It sparked a nationwide reckoning that still echoes today. August 22, 2007, was just another ordinary day for Rhys Jones. The 11-year-old had spent the summer doing what he loved most, playing football. That evening, he had just finished training at the Fir Tree Boys Club, a local football academy in Croxteth, Liverpool. Wearing his Everton jersey and still buzzing from the session, he set off for home, walking through the Fir Tree pub car park as the sun began to set. But what Rhys didn't know was that, just yards away, a teenage gang member was waiting to strike. 16-year-old Sean Mercer, a known member of the Croxteth crew, had been lurking in the area, armed with a loaded handgun. His target was a rival gang member from the Strand gang, part of an ongoing feud that had been simmering for months. Mercer was looking for revenge, but his reckless actions would claim an innocent life instead. At 7:30 p.m., Mercer pulled out a Smith & Wesson .45 caliber pistol and, without hesitation, fired 3 shots across the car park. One bullet missed. Another ricocheted off a post. But the third struck Rhys Jones in the neck. The young boy collapsed to the ground. Blood pooled around him as bystanders rushed to help, their screams shattering the evening calm. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, desperately trying to save his life. Rhys was still breathing when they placed him in the ambulance, but the damage had been done. As he was rushed to Alder Hey Children's Hospital, his parents, Mel and Steve Jones, received the call that no mother or father should ever have to hear. Their son had been shot. They raced to the hospital, praying that somehow, he would pull through. But just an hour later, their worst nightmare came true. Rhys Jones was pronounced dead at 8:46 p.m. A happy, football-loving boy had been stolen from his family, not because of anything he had done, but because he had the terrible misfortune of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. News of the shooting spread quickly, leaving Liverpool in shock. The city had seen gang violence before, but never something like this. An innocent child had been gunned down in broad daylight, and his killer was still out there, free. As police launched a desperate hunt for the shooter, one question echoed through the streets of Liverpool. How could this happen? Within hours of Rhys Jones' death, news of the shooting spread across Liverpool. People couldn't believe what they were hearing. An innocent 11-year-old boy, shot dead while walking home from football practice. The shock quickly turned to grief, anger, and disbelief. Outside the Fir Tree pub, where Rhys had collapsed, flowers and Everton football scarves began piling up. Strangers who had never met him came to pay their respects, leaving notes with messages like "Rest in peace, Little Blue," a nod to his love for Everton Football Club. For Mel and Steve Jones, the world had come crashing down. Just hours earlier, they had been expecting their son home for dinner. Now, they were standing in a hospital room, trying to process the unbearable truth: Rhys was gone. Mel later described the moment she saw her son lying lifeless on the hospital bed. "I held his hand, but it was so cold. I just kept thinking, this can't be real. He was just a little boy. How could this happen?" Rhys' older brother, Owen, was equally devastated. The two had been inseparable, bonded by their love of football and their endless sibling banter. Now, his best friend was gone. As the news made national headlines, Liverpool became a city in mourning. People from across the country sent messages of condolence. Everton Football Club, Rhys' favourite team, paid tribute, with players wearing black armbands in their next match. Rival club Liverpool FC also honoured him, proving that some things were bigger than football. In Croxteth, the community was gripped by fear and frustration. Parents worried for their own children. If an innocent boy like Rhys could be killed, who was safe. Calls for justice grew louder, and pressure mounted on the police to find the killer. But there was a problem. No one was talking. The police knew the shooting was gang-related and that the killer was likely from the Croxteth crew. But in areas like Croxteth, there was an unspoken rule: you don't snitch. People feared gang retaliation if they spoke to the police. Despite the silence, detectives vowed to track down the gunman and bring him to justice. The entire country was watching, waiting for answers. Would the people responsible for Rhys' death be caught? Or would the gang code of silence let a killer walk free? From the moment Rhys Jones was shot, police knew they were dealing with a gang-related crime. The bullet that struck him had been fired in a reckless attempt to hit a rival, a deadly consequence of Liverpool's growing gang wars. But solving the case wouldn't be easy. Detectives immediately focused on the Croxteth crew, the gang that controlled the area where the shooting took place. The group had a reputation for violence, intimidation, and most importantly, a strict code of silence. In Croxteth, people didn't talk to the police. If they did, they risked becoming the next target. Despite this, police quickly identified Sean Mercer, a 16-year-old known for his involvement in the gang, as the prime suspect. Witnesses had placed him in the area at the time of the shooting, and intelligence suggested he had been looking for a rival from the Strand gang that evening. But knowing something and proving it in court were two very different things. In the days after Rhys' murder, police faced a wall of silence. Even those who weren't involved were terrified to come forward. But detectives weren't about to let a child's killer walk free. They combed through CCTV footage, phone records, and forensic evidence, determined to find something that would tie Mercer to the crime. The biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Despite the gang's intimidation tactics, a few brave individuals decided they couldn't stay silent any longer. Quietly, behind closed doors, witnesses began to talk. Someone identified Mercer as the shooter, while others gave details about a secret operation to destroy evidence after the killing. Investigators soon learned that after the shooting, Mercer had panicked. He knew the police would be looking for him, so he called in help from his gang. That night, he was taken to a house where he was stripped of his clothes. His friends then burned his tracksuit and cleaned the murder weapon, hoping to erase any traces of the crime. But they had made one critical mistake. The gun had already been linked to previous shootings. As police gathered more evidence, the noose tightened around Mercer. But without a confession or a key witness willing to testify in court, securing a conviction would still be an uphill battle. Would justice for Rhys finally come? Or would Mercer escape punishment thanks to the gang's code of silence? As the pressure mounted, police knew they had their suspect. But they needed undeniable proof to make the charges stick. Sean Mercer had killed an innocent child in cold blood, but the Croxteth crew was protecting him. This wasn't just a murder investigation anymore. It was a battle against a gang culture that thrived on fear, silence, and loyalty. On August 29, 2007, just a week after the shooting, police arrested Mercer along with several other gang members. But there was a problem: no one was talking. Mercer refused to answer questions, sticking to the gang's unwritten rule: deny everything, admit nothing. Without solid evidence, police had to release him on bail. But detectives weren't done. They knew Mercer had helped covering up the crime, and they were determined to expose everyone involved. As police continued to investigate, they discovered the carefully planned cover-up that had unfolded in the hours after Rhys' murder. After shooting Rhys, Mercer fled the scene, knowing he had made a terrible mistake. Instead of turning himself in, he called for help. That's when a group of his gang associates, including James Yates, Nathan Quinn, Boy M, Boy K, and others, put a plan into action. James Yates, a key member of the Croxteth crew, supplied the murder weapon and arranged for it to be hidden. Mercer was taken to the home of Boy M, where his bloody clothes were burned to destroy evidence. The Smith & Wesson pistol used in the shooting was wiped clean and moved between locations to keep it out of police hands. The gang members all agreed on one thing: if the police came knocking, they would say nothing. What the gang didn't count on was forensic evidence and witness testimony slowly closing in on them. The gun was eventually found, and forensic tests linked it to multiple previous shootings, including the one that killed Rhys. Phone records, CCTV footage, and witness statements further backed up the police's case. The net was tightening, and the gang members started turning on each other. By the end of the year, police had enough evidence to make their move. In April 2008, they arrested Sean Mercer and 6 others, charging them with murder, assisting an offender, and perverting the course of justice. The gang's code of silence had finally cracked, but now, they were headed for trial. Would justice finally be served, or would Mercer and his crew manage to escape the consequences of their actions? It took over a year, but by October 2008, the trial of Sean Mercer and his gang associates finally began at Liverpool Crown Court. The case had gripped the nation. This wasn't just about one senseless murder. It was about gang culture, youth violence, and a community silenced by fear. Mercer, now 18 years old, sat in the dock, still refusing to show any emotion. He had spent the past year denying everything, sticking to his gang's code of silence. But the prosecution wasn't relying on a confession. They had built a case so strong that Mercer had nowhere to hide. The prosecution laid out the chain of events from that fateful evening in August 2007. They presented ballistics evidence proving that the gun used to kill Rhys had also been used in previous Croxteth crew shootings. CCTV footage showing Mercer's movements before and after the murder. Phone records revealing calls made between Mercer and his gang during the cover-up. Forensic evidence linking Mercer to the crime scene. But the most damning evidence came from the gang members who had once protected him. The pressure had become too much. Some had turned against Mercer to save themselves. Testimonies from his own associates exposed the cover-up in detail, proving that Mercer had pulled the trigger and that his friends had helped him escape justice. After 10 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for 3 days. Then, on December 16, 2008, the verdict was delivered. Sean Mercer was found guilty of Rhys Jones' murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 22 years before parole. As the verdict was read out, Mercer showed no emotion. He had spent his youth chasing gang status, but now, he was spending the rest of his prime years behind bars. Alongside Mercer, 6 others were convicted for their role in the cover-up. James Yates, who supplied the gun, 12 years. Nathan Quinn, 2 years. Dean Kelly, 4 years. Melvin Coy, Gary Kays, and Boy M, 7 years each. For Rhys' family, the verdict was a small victory in an unimaginable loss. His parents, Mel and Steve Jones, had fought relentlessly to keep the case in the public eye, refusing to let their son's murder be forgotten. Now, at least, the people responsible were finally facing justice. But one question remained: would anything really change? Or was Rhys Jones just another innocent victim in a cycle of violence that would continue to claim young lives? The murder of Rhys Jones wasn't just a tragic, isolated event. It was a symptom of a much bigger problem. Across the UK, youth gangs were on the rise, and Rhys' death forced the country to confront a disturbing reality. Teenagers, some as young as 13 or 14, were carrying guns, selling drugs, and engaging in violent turf wars. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, cities like Liverpool, Manchester, London, and Birmingham saw a surge in gang-related violence. Groups like the Croxteth crew and the Strand gang were locked in a bitter rivalry, mirroring similar gang wars in other UK cities. These gangs weren't just fighting over money or drugs, they were fighting over respect, territory, and power. But what made young teenagers, some still in school, pick up guns and risk their lives for gangs? Several factors contributed to the rise of gang culture in the UK. Lack of opportunities. Many young people in areas like Croxteth grew up in poverty and broken homes, with little hope for the future. Gangs offered a sense of belonging, power, and identity. Drugs and money. With the rise of cocaine and heroin markets, gangs became business operations, recruiting teenagers to run drugs in exchange for fast cash. Retaliation culture. In gang life, if someone disrespected you or your crew, you had to respond with violence. Backing down meant weakness. This endless cycle of revenge shootings kept the violence alive. The no snitching rule, the fear of being labelled a grass informant, meant that even when innocent people got hurt, nobody talked. Police struggled to get witnesses to come forward, and criminals operated with confidence. Rhys' murder shook the nation, forcing politicians, police, and community leaders to take a stand. Stricter gun laws, tougher gang policing, and community programs were introduced in an effort to stop further bloodshed. In Liverpool, special police task forces cracked down on gang activity, leading to mass arrests and weapons seizures. Community programs were launched to steer young people away from gang life, offering them education, jobs, and safe spaces. But despite these efforts, gang-related violence never fully disappeared. In the years after Rhys' death, knife crime surged, with young people still caught in the cycle of violence. The killing of Rhys Jones was supposed to be a wake-up call. It exposed the dark reality of gang violence in Britain and led to some changes in policing and prevention efforts. But even today, gang culture still exists, and young lives continue to be lost to senseless violence. For Rhys' family, justice was served, but nothing could bring their son back. Their tragedy became a symbol of the urgent need to end youth violence, but the fight was far from over. The real question is, how many more innocent lives will be lost before the cycle finally ends? The murder of Rhys Jones left a wound that would never fully heal. For his parents, Mel and Steve Jones, life would never be the same. They had lost their 11-year-old son in the most senseless way imaginable, killed by a bullet meant for someone else. But instead of being consumed by anger, they made a decision. Rhys' death would not be in vain. Mel and Steve refused to let their son's memory fade into just another crime statistic. They became public advocates against gang violence, speaking out in interviews, documentaries, and community events to ensure that no other family would have to suffer the same pain. One of their biggest efforts was their work with young people. They visited schools, warning kids about the dangers of gang life, hoping that Rhys' story would make them think twice before joining a gang or carrying a weapon. Their message was simple. Violence isn't just a gang problem, it destroys innocent lives. No one is untouchable. If you live by the gun, you will face the consequences. There are always other choices. Gang life isn't the only way. In 2018, over a decade after his death, the Jones family's fight for change took a major step forward. The Rhys Jones Community Centre was opened in Croxteth, the very area where gang violence had stolen his life. The centre was designed as a safe space for local kids, offering sports, activities, and mentorship programs to keep them off the streets. Mel Jones described it best. This is what Rhys would have wanted. He loved football, he loved being around his friends, and he had a future. If this centre stops just one child from going down the wrong path, then it's worth it. The story of Rhys Jones has never been forgotten. It has been the subject of documentaries, books, and even a TV drama, Little Boy Blue, 2017, which brought national attention back to the case. The drama highlighted not only Rhys' tragic death but also the culture of fear, silence, and violence that had allowed it to happen. Despite the convictions of Sean Mercer and his gang, youth violence and gang culture continue to take lives across the UK. Rhys' murder was supposed to be a wake-up call, but for many, the cycle of violence still hasn't ended. Mel and Steve Jones will always grieve for their son. No amount of time, no court verdict, and no community program can bring him back. But they have chosen to honour him not just with memories, but with action. Rhys was just a boy walking home from football practice, a boy who should have grown up, followed his dreams, and lived a full life. Instead, his name became a symbol of the devastating cost of gang violence. The question remains: how many more innocent lives will be lost before real change happens?